Welcome back, Year 5 and Year 6 to our topic lesson part 2 of Alexander the Great, or Does Alexander Deserve the Name Great? So today we're going to cover part 2, exploring primary and secondary sources of information. Part 3, was Alexander the Great that great? And we're going to try to come up to a conclusion. So grab the book you were using last time and write the short date in the margin, and I'll catch up with you super soon. So, as it says here, today we're going to have a look at primary and secondary sources of information. So I'm going to guide you today, and we're going to discover what they are. So, when you research, you have to gather information and evidence from different sources, and they can be primary sources of information or secondary sources of information. So what we call primary sources of information are information that provide raw information and first-hand evidence. It could be interview, transcript, data, works of art. A primary source gives you direct access to the subject of your research. Secondary sources, on the other hand, provide second-hand information and commentary from other researchers. For example, journal articles, reviews, academic books. A secondary source describes, interprets, or synthesizes primary sources. Overall, primary sources are more credible as evidence, but good research uses both primary and secondary sources. So, for our lesson today, I have collected different sources of information, and we're going to look at them, try to decide whether they are primary or secondary sources of information. And we're going to try to gather data, information to answer our question, does Alexander deserve the name great? So before we move on, you might want to pause the video and read again this slide about primary and secondary sources of information. Don't hesitate to pause, and I'll catch up with you soon. So, as I've said, year 5 and year 6, I've gathered different sources of information in the coming slides, and you will have an activity to do using this slide and these sources of information. So for each source, it's going to be interesting to decide whether it's a primary or secondary source of information. Then to try to discover whether the source describes a positive aspect of Alexander or a negative aspect of Alexander. Now, obviously, it was designed to work in groups, which we can't do at the moment. However, if you're at home, you might maybe want to work with a friend online, or you might want to do some work and then share with a friend. And if you're in class at St. Helens or at St. Mary's, maybe you want just to share with a friend that you have next to you. Up to you how you want to organize yourself. I'm just going to guide you through two sources to give you an idea of what is expecting from you. So, are you ready, year 5 and year 6? Here we go. So, here I've got two sources of information. I've got source 1 and source 2. Source 1, as I can read, is an extract from People's Alexander the Great's Art of Strategy, and it's a book that was published in 2004. And I've got here an extract from page 78. Source 2, on the other hand, is a painting of Alexander riding his famous horse Bucephalus at the Battle of Issus, and it's from a website. Okay, so I'll let you pause a moment, year 5 and 6. Maybe you want to go back to the previous slide and decide which source is a primary source and which source is a secondary source of information. So take some time and I will catch up with you in a minute. Well done, children. Nice to have you back after this pause. So source 1 is an extract of a book, probably by a professor or researcher, so it's a secondary source of information. Source 2, some could argue that it's a painting, so it might probably be primary source of information. Honestly, I'm not so sure. Obviously, we have a nice painting of Alexander the Great, or not sure if he's so great, but this is a question we're trying to answer on his horse. Has the painting been done just at the time of Alexander, or is it a recent painting? Is a painting based on facts that we have been read in a book? We're not so sure. So I would classify this painting as a secondary source of information, but I am not so sure. What do you think? Now, let's go back to source 1. If you read source 1, what do you think? Does it describe some positive aspects of Alexander? Does it describe some negative aspects of Alexander, or you're not sure? So let's have a look together. Most Macedonians were in love with the personality cult of their young prince. Oh, that's kind of positive. People liked him. His physical stature was by no means imposing, but stocky and muscular. He had light brown hair and eyes of the same color, and historians have described him as rather good looking. He was agile and fast, that's very positive, and was a fabulous rider, even fully armored. Well, good quality, another positive aspect. He was a masterful swordman and spear fighter, even fully armored again. He was a masterful, I repeat the sentence, and the display of his personal courage in various wars and expeditions was the stuff of legends. Oh, to me, Alexander seems to deserve the name great. Lots of positive aspects of him are described in here. So, to me, if I just read this part, I could say, oh, Alexander really deserves the name great. Looking at the picture, what do you think? Do you think this painting describes some positive aspects of Alexander or some negative aspects of Alexander? I give you some time to think about it, maybe to talk with someone next to you, or maybe like if you're working with a friend online, just to have a chat with a friend online. So take your time and I'll catch up with you very soon. Okay, year 5 and year 6. Now let's dive into your activities. I've selected different sources that I've numbered, so source 3, source 4, and so on. So you're going to play the video, you're going to have a look at the different sources I've selected, and I suggest maybe you choose 2 or 3 or 4 that you want to have a look at in details. For each source, I would like you to do the same as we've just done. Is it a primary or secondary source of information? Does it describe some positive aspects of Alexander or some negative aspects of Alexander? Or after reading or looking at it, you're not sure? Up to you. So as before, or as we did last session, I'm going just to play the different slides. I'm going to make sure you have enough time to read them. Obviously, feel free to pause, choose some sources and try to complete for each source, whether you learn some positive aspects or negative aspects of Alexander's life. So here we go. Source 3 and 4. Here we've got source 5, 6, and 7. Moving on to source 8, 9, and 10. Sources 11 and 12. Sources 13, 14, 15, and 16. 17 and 18. And finally, sources 19 and 20. So pause the video here, year 5 and year 6. Obviously, it's time for you now just to decide which sources you want to have a look at in more details. Pick 3 or 4 if you have enough time. So decide for each source whether it's a primary or secondary source of information, whether it describes some positive aspects of Alexander's life, negative aspects of Alexander's life, or maybe you're still unsure. So take some time to complete this activity and I will catch up with you very soon. Amazing work, year 5 and year 6. So as we've done in the previous session, we're going to complete the same grid. Does Alexander deserve the name great? So after looking at primary and secondary sources of information, what do you think? Yes, Alexander deserves the name great because. No, it doesn't deserve the name great because, or I'm still unsure. So take some time to complete the grid. If you prefer, you can also add your notes to the previous grid. Take your time and I will catch up with you in about 5 minutes. Okay, not sure it's been 5 minutes already, but let's dive into part 3. Was Alexander the Great that great? It's a question we've been trying to answer for the last 2 sessions. So let's see what we can come up with. Here we go. I decided to make a graph. So that's something you can draw in your books too. An x-axis here and a y-axis here. And I wrote terrible here, great here. So we're going to take some facts about Alexander's life and we're going to decide whether they are great achievements or terrible achievement. And maybe once we've got the grid completed, that's going to help us visualize whether Alexander was great or not so great. I'm just going to model one and then you can add as many aspects of his life you want. As a boy, Alexander was taught by Aristotle. Wow, I think that was really, really great. So I give him a great mark. I could also have Alexander was a great rider. Another great achievement, and so on. So up to you to decide which aspects of Alexander's life you want to have here and grade them from terrible to great. Up to you, year 5 and 6. Honestly, I'm very curious to see what you're going to come up with. So pause the video and complete this activity. Awesome work, year 5 and year 6. So now let's move on to our last part, our conclusion or your conclusion. Does Alexander deserve the name great? Up to you to tell me. So in your opinion, does Alexander deserve the name great? Question mark. So could you please develop a short paragraph to tell me your thoughts about it? So year 5 and year 6, it was great to have you on board this week for Does Alexander Deserve the Name Great? I hope you had great fun and I will see you next week for another adventure in ancient Greece. Take care and see you soon. Bye.